Episode 188. Make a Splash. Monkey's determination wavered. Although Serena was one-of-a-kind beauty, he knew with the money she was offering, he could easily have any woman and a life on his terms. $5 million. He had never seen that much money in his life. Bristling, Mrs. Cox shouted, "Monkey, what are you thinking so much for? I am still Mrs. Cox. It's just $5 million. I will give that much to you. Do your job right now. If Jake Robinson came here, he will snatch this woman and your life from you." The two guys knocked over by Charlie Wrong got up from under and threw themselves at him. "Don't believe her. The Cox family is bankrupt. Their business has been acquired by the Robinson Group. She's nothing but talk. If she had money, why didn't she hire someone more expensive than you?" Serena cried in a loud voice. She didn't know whether this would work, but she knew she had to try. At the same time, the two guys behind Charlie had launched their attack. One choked him with his arm, and the other hit him in his stomach with a punch. Mrs. Cox was pissed off with her plan not working out, as she imagined it to be. She turned around and walked towards Serena and grabbed her hair. She knocked Serena's head against the railing of the bridge. "You little wench of a woman. You have ruined everything for me and my family." Her head thumped against the metal. Charlie Wrong took a hard punch. The moment Mrs. Cox turned around, he butted the guy in front of him in the stomach and yanked the arm of the man behind him, throwing him on top of the other guy. Noticing the change, Mrs. Cox immediately turned around. However, Charlie had already thrown himself at her. She backed off in a panic and squeezed her finger. Boom! A loud gunshot. Ah! Feeling dizzy, Serena heard the gunshot, saw the blood, and became unconscious. Mrs. Cox shuddered, immediately pushed Charlie Wrong's body away, and looked at the blood on her hands. After throwing the gun away, Mrs. Cox's hands were shaking. "I killed someone?" She stared her eyes wide at Charlie Wrong. He stumbled. His face was pale as he covered his wounded arm. Picking the gun up, he did not look like someone who had just been shot. "Let her go." "Damn you!" Someone yelled behind him and brought him to the ground with a flying tackle. Charlie Wrong fell flat on the ground, letting go of the gun. Cars arrived. Mrs. Cox was shocked. "Someone else is here." Several cars wrapped them up from a distance. Mrs. Cox became pale. "That Jake Robinson must have sent them. Damn it!" She quickly went up to yank the unconscious Serena up. "I told him to come alone, but he had so many people. He's trying to make me kill her." Despite her ladylike demeanor, Mrs. Cox was a strong woman. She easily put Serena over her shoulder and then on top of the railing. Overpowered by the guy sitting on top of him, Charlie had to take one punch after another. Seeing that, his heart thumped as he roared, "What are you doing? Go to hell!" Mrs. Cox threw Serena's body down into the water. Soon they heard a loud splash. Seeing Serena falling into the river, Charlie Wrong felt as if his pain had disappeared, and the only thought that was active in his head was Serena. All he could think about was saving her. Using all his strength to get himself free, he jumped into the river without thinking. 6 cars laid siege to them. Mrs. Cox had nowhere to run, and all 4 of them were caught. "Where is she?" the head of the group demanded. Mrs. Cox sneered. "Who? I don't understand what you're talking about." "Boss Blood here," someone cried. "We did not find Mrs. Robinson." There was blood on the ground, while no one had an injury. Looking around, the member of the car entourage suddenly had a thought and shouted, "Search the water!" A black Maybach crashed into the rails. Jake lost his consciousness and woke up after God knows how long. Seeing the traffic police and people around him, and then the cracked windshield. He moved, wanting to start the car again, but he failed. Grabbing his cell phone, he opened the door with a terrible headache. Blood was flowing down his forehead. Jake gave it a wipe and stumbled in the direction of Serena. Almost there. Almost. He glanced at his cell phone and immediately saw Mrs. Cox's video. He ran as fast as he could and taped to download it. However, he was so dizzy that he almost fell a couple of times. People and cars followed him, but Jake was barely conscious enough to hear what they were saying. After stumbling 600 feet, he finally saw cars that belonged to the Robinson family. Several of them. As he rushed over, the video was downloaded. Her screams were played on his phone, making his heart stop. Everyone standing next to the river looked over. Seeing Jake like that, his relatives were shocked and quickly supported him. Jake? Looking at the video, Jake became conscious and gloomy. Where is she? No one replied, but at the same time, a shout came from the river. We didn't find her! The headlights of the cars were still on. Jake glanced at the ground and saw the pool of blood. What are you looking for? She's dead. Mrs. Cox laughed. Jake Robinson, you pushed me to do it. You ruined the fortune of the Cox family and my daughter's youth. Aren't you somebody responsible for that? Now look at this. You are paying for your own actions. Jake stared at the blood, almost losing his mind. His breath quickened and his ears were ringing. What are you looking at? I shot her right in the heart. No doctor could save her. If you want to look for her, look in the river. She's down there. Don't you dare? Let's hope. Mrs. Cox's voice was intoxicating, ringing in his ears. 2 more people jumped into the water to help. Hearing the splash, Jake was unable to fathom what Mrs. Cox was saying, acted impulsively, and immediately actioned to throw himself in the river. Shocked, people around him quickly held him down and exclaimed, Someone is down there searching already. Jake seemed to calm down. The guy softened his voice and said, 4 people have gone. You will achieve nothing but suicide going down like this. Do you want Serena to come back and see your body? Hearing that person's words, he calmed down. When the guy let out a sigh of relief and released him, Jake immediately dashed to Mrs. Cox, who had been pinned down. Acting out of sheer rage, he took the pistol from his security's belt and pointed it towards Mrs. Cox. Startled, she screamed and broke away from the clasps of the crowd. However, the people immediately grabbed her again. I warned you not to touch her.